The auctioneer's voice cut through the morning air like a blade through flesh. Next lot, one girl, age 12, strong back, good with animals. What am I bid? Sarah's bare feet pressed against the wooden platform, her thin dress clinging to her trembling frame. The crowd below her blurred through tears she refused to let fall. Not here, not like this. The iron shackles had been removed, but invisible chains still bound her to this moment. The same moment that had stolen her mother 3 years ago. $10, called a voice from the back. 15. Another man, closer to the front, his yellowed teeth visible even from the platform. Sarah's fingers found the small piece of cloth tied around her wrist, the last remnant of her mother's dress. She pressed it to her lips, remembering Mama's final words. No matter where they take you, baby girl, remember who you are. $20, going once. The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty town square of Millfield, Texas. Flies buzzed around the livestock pens nearby, and the stench of unwashed bodies and desperation hung heavy in the air. Sarah had watched this same scene play out dozens of times in her short life, but never from up here, never as the prize being fought over by strangers. From the crowd, a tall man stepped forward. His weathered hat cast shadows across a face marked by years under the sun, but his eyes, those eyes held something different. Not hunger like the others, not calculation, something that made Sarah's chest tighten, with an emotion she couldn't name. $50, his voice carried like thunder across the suddenly quiet square. The auctioneer's gavel paused mid-air. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. $50 was more money than most of these people saw in a month. Sold to the gentleman in the brown coat. As the crowd dispersed and money changed hands, Sarah felt those eyes on her again. The rancher approached the platform slowly, each step deliberate, careful. When he reached for her hand to help her down, she flinched. Easy there, he said softly. Name's Thomas Hartwell, and you don't have to be afraid anymore. But Sarah had learned that promises from strangers were like smoke. They disappeared the moment you tried to hold them. The wagon ride to the Hartwell ranch passed in tense silence. Sarah sat as far from Thomas as the narrow bench would allow, her body coiled like a spring ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The landscape rolled past in waves of brown grass and scattered mesquite trees, but her attention remained fixed on the man beside her. When they finally reached the ranch house, a modest structure of weathered wood and stone, Thomas helped her down with the same careful gentleness he'd shown at the auction. "This is home," he said simply. Inside, Sarah's eyes immediately cataloged escape routes. 2 windows, 1 door, a back entrance through what looked like a kitchen. The house was clean but lived in, with a woman's touches that spoke of someone who was no longer there. Dried flowers in mason jars, a quilt draped over the sofa, photographs on the mantel. "You hungry?" Thomas asked, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Sarah's stomach cramped with need, but she shook her head. Taking food from him would mean accepting this, whatever this was, and she'd learned the hard way that nothing came without a price. Thomas studied her for a long moment. "I know what you're thinking. Man buys a girl at auction, brings her to his ranch. You're wondering what he wants in return." Sarah's silence stretched between them like a chasm. "My wife and I," Thomas continued, moving to the kitchen, "we lost our daughter 5 years ago. Fever took her when she was about your age. Elizabeth, that was her name? She had hair just like yours, golden, like wheat before harvest." He pulled bread and preserves from a cabinet, his movements slow and deliberate. "Martha, my wife, she passed 2 winters ago. Couldn't bear the emptiness anymore, I suppose. Left me with nothing but memories and a house too quiet for one person." Sarah watched him prepare the simple meal, confusion warring with caution in her chest. "Why?" she whispered, her first word since leaving the auction block. Thomas turned to face her fully. "Because every child deserves to know what it feels like to be chosen, not bought, to be wanted, not used." He set the plate on the table between them. "Because maybe we can heal each other's broken places." The bread smelled like heaven, and Sarah's resolve began to crack. But just as she reached for it, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Thomas's face darkened as he moved to the window. "Stay away from the windows," he said, his voice suddenly hard as iron. "Looks like we've got visitors." The riders came fast and angry, dust clouds announcing their arrival like war banners. Sarah pressed herself against the far wall as Thomas grabbed a rifle from above the fireplace. his movements sharp and purposeful. "Hartwell!" The voice outside carried the authority of a badge and the menace of a loaded gun. "Sheriff Morrison here. Open up!" Thomas worked the rifle's action, the metallic sound echoing in the suddenly suffocating room. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "You can start by explaining why you paid $50 for a girl at auction when there are families in town who could have used the help for half that price." Morrison's voice grew closer to the door. "Some folks are wondering if your intentions are Christian." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. She'd seen this before. The accusations, the mob mentality, the way suspicion spread like wildfire through small towns. Men who helped alone women or children were always suspect, their motives questioned, their reputations destroyed by whispers and speculation. "My intentions are my own business," Thomas called back. But Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. "Not when it involves the welfare of a child, they ain't." Another voice joined Morrison's. Deputy Hayes, Sarah realized, recognizing the nasal tone. "We got reports you've been living out here alone since your wife passed. Ain't natural for a man to want a young girl around unless—" The implication hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Thomas moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. "3 men," he whispered to Sarah. "Maybe more coming." His jaw worked as he considered their options. "They're not going to leave without trouble." Outside, Morrison's voice rose again. "We're coming in, Hartwell. You got 10 seconds to open this door, or we'll open it ourselves." Sarah felt the familiar terror rising in her throat, the same helplessness she'd felt watching her mother dragged away, watching other children disappear into situations that left them broken or dead. But this time was different. This time, someone was choosing to stand between her and the wolves. "Whatever happens," Thomas said quietly, not taking his eyes off the window, "you remember what I told you. Some people are worth fighting for." The sound of spurs on wooden steps announced that their time had run out. "On 3, Thomas whispered, his hand steady on the rifle despite the odds stacked against them. But before he could count, Sarah stepped forward. "Wait!" Her voice was small but determined. "Let me talk to them." Thomas turned to her, confusion and concern warring in his expression. "Sarah, no. These men think you bought me for the wrong reasons." She moved closer to the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. "But I know better now." Before Thomas could stop her, Sarah opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The 3 men on horseback looked down at her with varying degrees of suspicion and pity. Sheriff Morrison, a heavy-set man with graying whiskers, leaned forward in his saddle. "Girl, are you all right? Has this man hurt you in any way?" Sarah looked back through the doorway at Thomas, who stood frozen with his rifle lowered, trust and terror battling in his eyes. Then she turned back to the sheriff. "My mama was sold at auction when I was 9, she said, her voice carrying further than she'd expected. "Man who bought her. He used her up and threw her away like she was nothing. I watched it happen. Couldn't stop it." The men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. "When I stood on that platform today, I thought it was going to be the same. Thought I'd end up like Mama, broken and forgotten." Sarah's hand found the piece of cloth on her wrist, drawing strength from it. "But this man, Mr. Hartwell, he didn't buy me to use me. He bought me to save me." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Child, sometimes men say things." "He showed me a picture," Sarah interrupted, "of his daughter, Elizabeth. She died 5 years ago." She looked back at Thomas again, seeing him through new eyes. "He ain't trying to replace her. He's trying to honor her memory by doing what she would have wanted, helping someone who needed it." Deputy Hayes scoffed. "Pretty words, but you want proof?" Sarah's voice grew stronger, more defiant. "Then look at me. Really look. Do I look afraid? Do I look hurt?" She spread her arms wide. "Or do I look like someone who just learned what it feels like to be chosen instead of sold?" The silence stretched long enough for a hawk to cry overhead, its call echoing across the empty rangeland. "Fee. Nally," Sheriff Morrison touched the brim of his hat. "We'll be checking back, Hartwell, regular-like." Thomas nodded. "You're welcome any time, Sheriff." As the riders disappeared into the distance, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of chains she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten they were there. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same kitchen where she'd first tasted Thomas's bread, but everything had changed. The house no longer felt empty. It hummed with the quiet contentment of people who had found their place in the world. She was helping Thomas prepare dinner when he cleared his throat nervously. "Sarah, I've been thinking about something. About making this official." Sarah looked up from the vegetables she was cutting, her heart suddenly racing. "I've spoken with Judge Patterson in town about adoption papers." Thomas's weathered hands fumbled with his hat. "About making you legally my daughter, if that's something you'd want." The knife slipped from Sarah's fingers, clattering to the counter. For a moment, she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The word daughter echoed in her mind like a prayer finally answered. "You mean it?" she whispered. Thomas's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I mean it. You're already my daughter in every way that matters. This would just make it so the law sees it too." Sarah threw her arms around his neck, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself cry. Not from fear or pain, but from joy so pure it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The adoption papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in November, with half the town present as witnesses. Sheriff Morrison himself stood as one of the signatories, his earlier suspicions long since replaced by respect for what he'd seen grow between the rancher and the girl. Years later, when Sarah had children of her own, she would tell them about the day she learned the difference between being sold and being chosen. She would show them the faded piece of cloth she still kept in a small wooden box, the last piece of her mother's dress, and explain how sometimes the worst moments in our lives are just the darkness before dawn breaks. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the wheat fields that now bore her married name, Sarah Hartwell Mason would remember a tall man in a weathered hat who taught her that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the courage to love someone broken and the faith to believe they can heal. The ranch still stands today, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, hope over despair. And if you listen carefully on summer nights, you might still hear echoes of laughter from a kitchen where two wounded souls found their way home to each other. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.